invite you to be seated. Turn your Bibles. Well, actually, don't turn in your Bibles because we're going to be going all over the place. Open your Bibles if you want to. This week we're going to be looking. This is everybody's favorite sermon, right? Every year we kind of do this. We begin the year by sort of realigning ourselves together and focusing ourselves as a church body in a direction. And so the first Sunday of the month we look at communion, and the second Sunday we look at sort of vision, our purpose as a church. And the third Sunday, we look at giving, and this is the Giving Sunday, everybody's favorite Sunday, right? Everybody likes talking about money. And there's a kind of an idea, especially like if you're here and you're an unbeliever, I just want to speak to you particularly for a moment. There's this idea, especially among unbelievers or people that don't know Jesus Christ, that the church and God are just after your money. Right? You've heard that maybe before. Maybe you're an unbeliever and you've gone to church. This is your first time coming to church, and it's a money sermon, and you're like, "See, there it is." So I just want to dispel that, and I want to say two things about that. Number one, God is not primarily after your money. That's the maybe good news for you this morning. The really good news is He's after so much more than your money. Right? He doesn't want your wallet. He wants your whole life. He wants your heart. He wants your allegiance. He wants every aspect of your life. So it is both relieving because I'm not just preaching this sermon to get you to give. In fact, if you're an unbeliever, this sermon about giving doesn't really apply to you because we don't want your money, outside of the fact that it should reveal something about your priorities in life and what you value in life and point you to the source of all joy and all provision, namely our Lord Jesus Christ. And so God's not after your money if you're an unbeliever. He is after so much more than that. And that's also terrifying because if He takes control of your entire life, if He takes possession of you as a created creature and reconciles you to Himself through faith in Jesus Christ and His sacrificial death on the cross, that means that He lays hold and claim to everything, including your wallet, but not just your wallet. He lays claim to your speech. He lays claim to your actions. He lays claim to your motives. He lays claim to whether you go to Indonesia to preach the gospel or work a job here in York and are a participant in a local body here. So I just want to start off with that. And what I want to do this week is just give 4 principles for giving. I'm just going to ask 4 questions, and we're going to answer these questions from a variety of different scriptures. So you can turn there if you like, but I'll have the text up on the screen and you can follow along like that. And so the first question is, why should I give? It's sort of a good place to start. Why should I give? And the answer is because God has given to us and He is generous. Because God has given to us and He is generous. Now, as we think about why we should give, I think that it's helpful to look at 2 types of motives, right? Because underneath the why is the motive. And when we think about motives, there are wrong motives to give and right motives to give. So let's just take a look at a few of the wrong motives to give. And the reason I bring these up is not necessarily because this is addressing any big issue that I'm seeing. It's because we have a proclivity toward these things. We have a tendency toward these things. And it might arise in subtle little ways, and we're not even, that aren't even obvious to other people, but they can still be there, and we need to address them. So the first wrong motive is pride. Matthew chapter 6, verse 2 says, "Thus, when you give to the needy, do not sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly, I tell you, they have their reward." In other words, a wrong motive to give would be pride, having it done to be seen by others, to be praised by others, to have accolades by others, to have your name on a plaque, to have a building that you donated a lot of money to named after you, to have a little plaque on the couch that you gave, right? There's all sorts of different ways that this can show up. It can also show up in ways where we use giving as a tool for influence. We're giving out of a sense of pride because if I give, then I will be able to have some influence. People will see me. People will look to me. People will admire me. A second wrong motive is greed. Luke chapter 6, verse 38. And you've maybe heard this verse before, right? And this is an abused passage. It says, "Give and it will be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you." Well, that's pretty straightforward, right? If you give, then you'll get back. And you'll get back greater portion than what you gave. So you should give, because if you give, God's going to give you back more money. The problem is that this text is not dealing with giving really at all. The context of this passage is forgiveness. This text is talking about giving forgiveness and having an uncondemning attitude of being freely giving in that. And when we do that, that will be done for us. So a lot of people tend to use this text as if it's part of a divine get-rich scheme. You give to God, he'll give back to you, you'll get more, and it's more of like an investment in earthly things and earthly wealth. And what's at the heart of that? What's at the root of that when people give that way? It's greed. I'll give to God so that he'll give back to me and I'll accumulate more. And we become like that man that builds bigger barns. You read about that in the Bible. It doesn't work out so well for him. Another wrong motive is pressure or guilt. 2 Corinthians 9, verse 7. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. A wrong motive to give would be to give out of pressure or guilt. That would be compulsion. And unfortunately, this tactic is far too prevalent both in the church and in Christian ministries. It can come in the way of like the sort of the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel, where it's a sign of your faith. If you don't give, you don't have faith. If you don't give this amount, then you're not going to get. And the problem here is that it's a high pressure tactic. There's also the other one, like have you seen the commercials to feed hungry people or hungry children in Africa, right? You have the sad Sarah McLachlan song playing. I will remember you. And then you see this child that's skin and bones. And then the whole commercial is all about how you're a wealthy American, and for just 25 cents a day, you can help feed these children. Now, there's nothing wrong with feeding children in Africa, and there's nothing wrong with it. The issue is what's happening. It's a guilt trip. A lot of people, when they talk about giving, they'll put a guilt trip on you for having money. That's not what the Bible does. The Bible doesn't put a guilt trip on anybody for having money. This text is saying that the attitude with which we should give should not be under compulsion, should not be because of guilt or pressure. There's another wrong motive, and that's power and influence. In our culture, in our society, money is power. In the world's economy, money is power. And that attitude can creep into the church, and people can leverage money for influence to get what they want. In other words, this is the attitude that gives money with strings attached. That's a sinful attitude. So if we don't want to have the wrong motives, we do want to have the right motives. What are some of the right motives for giving? First, because God has given to us. James chapter 1, verse 17, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. God's generosity toward us, and by the way, this requires that we recognize this verse is true. Like every good and perfect gift comes from God. And in this context, it includes suffering and difficulty. All of these things, God gives us good and perfect gifts. He gives us generously. And because of that, that should motivate us rightly to be generous people. We're to reflect God's generous attitude and spirit as stewards of the generosity he has shown to us. He's given us everything. He's given us his son. In Ephesians, he has blessed us with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, he supplies us with good things to enjoy. So again, not a poverty sermon. It's not wrong to enjoy the good gifts that God has given. In fact, you can over-spiritualize giving to the detriment of a practical theology of enjoying God's gifts. God gives gifts to enjoy. Think about that. He gives you good gifts to enjoy. It's wrong when the enjoyment of those things supersedes our enjoyment of God. Those things are avenues for us to enjoy God as the giver. So it's not wrong to use your money. It's not wrong to have nice things. It's not wrong to be wealthy. But the question is, where does that come from? Do you recognize that? And then, as you recognize that God is the giver of these things, does that influence and impact your motive in how you steward those things? Does it change how you enjoy those things? Can you enjoy those things by inviting others to enjoy them with you? Can you enjoy those things by giving them away? Can you enjoy those things as a means of enjoying God, or have they become idols? So we're to reflect a giving attitude because God is a giving God. Another right motive is to please, glorify, and honor God. In 2 Corinthians chapter 9, the context of this is Paul is talking about giving. And in verse 12, he says, "For the ministry of this service is not only supplying the needs of the saints, but also overflowing in many thanksgivings to God. By their approval of this service, they will glorify God because of your submission that comes from your confession of the gospel and the generosity of your contribution for them and for all others." So you see their generosity, having a generous spirit, produces thanksgiving, praise, glory to God. And that is not a wrong motive to be generous. That is a really good motive to be generous. If we're generous because we want God to be glorified and praised and thanksgiving to him, that is a good motive to be generous. So we're generous because we want others to glorify God. Another right motive is to serve our master. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, no one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Generous giving, in other words, lessens the grip of money on us. Now, we as Americans really need to hear this. Money can have a stranglehold on your heart. Money can become a master that you serve. So how do you serve an inanimate object, an amoral object like money? Well, the way we answer that is by asking, what does it mean to serve God? To serve God is to see him and pursue him as the means of providing all of our desires and satisfaction. So to serve money is to pursue and orient your life toward the pursuit of money and the use of money as if it's the means of getting all of your satisfaction and desires. And so when our lives are reoriented away from the source of our needs being met, being money, to God, when our lives are reoriented away from money giving us what we want to God being the means of getting what we want, and by that I mean him, not to use him as like a divine Pez dispenser that you just open up and he'll pop something out for you. But he is the end. He is the goal. And when we see life like that, it frees us from the grasp that money can have on us, the stranglehold that money can have on us. And when that happens, we are free to be generous. We are serving God, not money. it puts money in its proper context. And then it's used to serve us rather than us serving it. It's a tool rather than a slave master. Another right motive is to be used by God. 2 Corinthians 9, 10, and 11. He who supplies the seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way to be generous in every way, which through us will produce thanksgiving to God. Do you see how God is working there? He's working through the generosity of his people. You will be enriched by God in every way to be generous in every way, which then God uses to produce thanksgiving and to accomplish his purposes. So a really good motive for giving is to be used by God. Think about this. God chose to include us as instruments in his hands to accomplish his work. In other words, he uses us and the resources that he gives us. So stinginess on our part doesn't hinder God. I'm going to say that again. Stinginess on our part doesn't hinder God. Remember, we're talking about pride and greed. The wrong motives for pride and greed can manifest themselves in, if I don't give, this won't work. And just be real straight. Like this is unscripted here. Everyone in this church could stop giving. This building could be repossessed, sold, everything done away with. And it would not in one small, tiny, minuscule way affect God's purposes in York. Guess what? You don't need a building to meet in like this. You can meet in a home. You don't need to have all of this. This can all go away. And yet, think about this. God chooses to use us to accomplish his purposes. God chooses to use us to support missionaries that take the gospel. God chooses to use us to do local ministries that impact people's lives for the gospel. Stinginess doesn't hinder God. It prevents you and me from receiving the blessing of being used by God. Another right motive is to lay up treasures in heaven. Matthew 6, 19 to 21. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now, this sounds like an incredibly self-serving motive to give. We should give because we want to lay up for ourselves treasures in heaven. And isn't that what Jesus is saying here? See, he doesn't use treasures in heaven as if it's some wrong motive. He uses that as a positive thing. And he says, it's so good that it should be a priority over and above storing up treasures on earth. You should be so into this that takes precedence over all of your wealth, all of your provision here on this earth. So it is not a wrong motive to give, to store up for yourself treasures in heaven. Investments on earth are insecure and fleeting. Investments in heaven are eternal and secure. And one day we will all leave this life, and as well as all the things that we accumulate. They don't have tow hitches on hearses. You don't drag stuff along with you when you die. Everything in this world is burning up and fleeting. I've said it before, like the thing that you prize most in this life, the material possession that you love the most, that you have the deepest emotional connection to, will be sold for pennies on the dollar by your kids at an estate sale. Kind of changes our perspective and how we view all of the things in this life, right? That's what Jesus is saying. He's saying, don't focus and orient your life around building up treasures here, but focus and orient your life on building treasures in heaven, because it's secure, it's permanent. And one day we will be left with the treasure that we accumulate in heaven. We won't get into this right now, but there are different levels of reward in heaven. We all get Jesus, we all are there, but there are different levels of reward for obedience and generosity. It's not wrong to want the greater reward there, right? That's not a bad motive to give. Another right motive is to grow our faith. When Paul was talking about the Macedonian church and their generosity, he said in 2 Corinthians 8, 4 and 5, that they were begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. And this, not as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then by the will of God to us. What is that? That's faith. We give ourselves first to the Lord, everything, our whole selves. And then by the will of God, we are free to give whatever it is that he's calling us to give. And that takes faith to step out and actually do that. We should have a motive of growing and exercising our faith that drives us toward generosity. They gave themselves first to God, and then by the will of God to others. So I've heard people say, when I'm in a better position financially, then I will give and be generous. And my response is, that's not true. It's not. If you don't exercise faith with the little that you have, what makes you think that you'll exercise faith if you have more? If you haven't toned the muscles of your faith to give when it's hard, to give when you're uncertain of whether or not it's going to impact your ability to buy the bigger house or get the newer car or whatever else it is, what makes you think that your faith is going to be strong enough to be able to give when the enticements of wealth have seduced you all the more? Because we all know that we just want bigger and better once we get more. Right? Think about this. You've maybe said, okay, look, when I get a raise, I'm going to save more. And you get a raise, and what's the first thing that happens? Oh, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this. And I can get it now. Our giving is an exercise of faith. Generosity is an act of faith. If we don't exercise faith with what we have now, we won't exercise faith with what we have later. And moreover, why would God place a stumbling block in our sanctification, in our growing in Christ's likeness, by giving us more wealth when we can't handle the wealth that we do have? So again, this is not like manipulate God to get rich. This is what you do with what you have shows where you trust and where you believe. And if you can't trust and believe and be a good steward with what you have now, then maybe it's God's grace to you that he's not giving you more. Because that would just make it all the more harder for you to be obedient and exercise faith. We put faith in money. We trust money to provide things for us. And therefore, it is an exercise of faith to give up money and to trust God with what he is calling us to give. Final right motive is to worship God. Philippians 4:18, I have received full payment and more. I am well supplied, having received from Epaphroditus the gifts that you sent, a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. That is worship language. fragrant offerings, sacrifices acceptable and pleasing to God. That is Old Testament worship language. So Joe read Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. It talks about offering your bodies as a living sacrifice. So God doesn't require animal sacrifices anymore. We don't slaughter cows and goats and all the rest of that stuff. We give ourselves. We are living sacrifices. And that means that everything that we have is an offering to God. Our whole lives are an offering to God, including all of our possessions, all of our time, all of our resources, all of our work, all of our talents, everything. Giving and generosity are acts of worship. They put the worth of God and His kingdom on display. They are tangible ways of saying, one life to live, which will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. We're going to get into this when we get into Esther. The first chapter of Esther is highlighting the opulent wealth of the king. The extravagance, the parties. He's putting his wealth on display. Where is that wealth now? What we do with it can have an impact for eternity, or it can only have a temporal impact. And by worshiping, we want to put God's worth and His value on display and say, He is a generous God. He is a good God. He is worthy, and we want others to see His worth in our lives, in how we steward our resources. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 16 says, do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices, worship, is pleasing to God. What we do with our money displays what or who we worship. And so notice here the difference between these two motives, between wrong motives and right motives. If you think back to the wrong motives, they are external and self-focused. Wrong motives for generosity are external and self-focused, but right motives are internal. In other words, they deal with the heart and the attitude and the disposition of the believer in relationship with God, and they are Godward focused. None of those good attitudes are me-focused, except in the case of like heavenly rewards, which if you understand what heavenly rewards are, that's God-focused. So we get God, more of God. All of the right motives are Godward focused, not self-focused. They're eternally focused, not temporally focused. And so in order to have these right motives, we need to see rightly our world and our lives. And that's where the gospel plays into that, because we have been redeemed out of the dominion of darkness and into the family of God. We have an eternal hope because we have trusted in Jesus Christ. He has sacrificed himself to save us. All of our sins have been dealt with through the blood of Christ, through faith in him. We are now new creations in Christ Jesus. You are not who you once were. And that means that we don't value the same things we used to value. We don't pursue the same things we used to pursue. We don't see our lives in the same framework that we used to see them. We belong to God. And everything in our lives belongs to God. And everything in our lives is an act of worship, either oriented toward God or oriented towards somebody else. And so the main reason why we should give is because of what God has first done for us. Because he has redeemed us, because he has saved us, because he has dealt with us with such lavish generosity in providing redemption in his Son, in bringing us into his family, in giving us confidence of the eternal hope that we have, that should release the chains of this world that try to bind us to our possessions and our things and our world, and live as children of the King. That's why we give. Not to avoid punishment, not to earn God's favor, but because he has dealt generously with us. And we now are free to display that generosity in our lives. So how should I give? Second question. Kind of already saw this, but with the right heart. Matthew 6:21, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Your heart follows what you value. Second Corinthians 9:7, each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. So the first way that we should give is with the right heart, which means that we need to constantly be calibrating or recalibrating our hearts with the gospel. If I find my heart being seduced by something other than Christ, if I find my affections being drawn toward things other than God, and again, I'm not saying it's wrong to have stuff. I'm saying the way that you enjoy things matters. If I start enjoying my children as if they are ultimate, I am worshiping my children and idolizing my children. Children are a good gift. They can also turn into little walking idols. The same is true with everything else in our lives. So we have to constantly be recalibrating our hearts by the gospel to tune them to sing his grace. Right? When we just sang that, tune my heart to sing your grace. We have to be saying, be thou my vision. And as our hearts are tuned and recalibrated, we will value differently. We will treasure differently. We will trust differently. And that leads us to give with the right heart. Secondly, we need to give in a planned and systematic way. There's two texts that I draw this from. The first one is 1 Corinthians 16, verse 2. On the first day of the week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up as he may prosper, so that there will be no collecting when I come. And then 2 Corinthians 9:7 says, each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. As he may prosper implies whenever I receive income, I should give. So on the first day of the week implies some sort of regular giving as an act of worship. So I just want to highlight that for a second. When we give, we receive something, we receive a wage, we receive something, we should give from the front end of that. And our giving should be an act of worship. And then he says, just as he has purpose, and that implies some sort of advanced planning. So I would suggest that your family sit down and prayerfully consider a fixed amount that you believe God wants you to give, and then plan to do that. That means that whatever it is, whatever that amount is, becomes something that you give up front when you're paid and not an afterthought. And you've planned out how you're going to do this. And it's something that you've agreed on, and you're doing it as an act of worship from a right heart. It's not an afterthought. And this is an exercise of faith and deliberate worship done with careful consideration and right motives. We should also give in secret and not to be seen before men. Matthew chapter 6, verses 1-4 says, beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them. For then you will have your reward, or you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. So we don't pass a plate here. That predated me coming here. There are giving boxes outside of each door that people can just give their gift on Sunday mornings. But there's a danger in giving to be seen by others. And so we should give in secret. We shouldn't tout it. We shouldn't boast about it. It should be something that is done before the face of God as an act of worship. Not to gain status and renown before men, but giving as worship. He sees it when no one else does, which means that our generosity is primarily done for God. We should also give sacrificially at times. In 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 2-3, it says, "For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty has overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means of their own accord." There is no New Testament number, no percentage that you have to give. The tithe was an Old Testament law. The principles that govern New Testament giving is regular and systematic giving, joyful giving, and at times sacrificial giving. There are times when God will call you to give perhaps more than you think you can afford. If you've been regularly and systematically giving, you will have seen how God has blessed your worship in the past. You will be in a habit of it. And you will have trained your faith to where it can be stretched and grown. And that enables you to respond to God's calling to give sacrificially with joy, worship, and without compulsion. I mean, just look at the way Paul describes it. He's blown away. He's bragging on God's grace evident in this church's life to other believers. And he's saying that, guys, this wasn't easy for them. It's not like they had a big cash reserve. They gave beyond what they could afford. And they did it with joy because they wanted to be a part of what God is doing. Third question is, to whom should I give? The first one, I think, is family members in need. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8 says, "But if anybody does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." That's why I say that should be the first one. And Paul doesn't say there's a lot of things in life that are worse than being an unbeliever. This is one of them. So neglect for one's family, in particular their immediate family, makes you worse than an unbeliever. So I just want to clarify, this doesn't include lazy or irresponsible family members because that violates biblical principles. Right? We're not talking about giving money to somebody who's going to go squander it at a casino and do that in lieu of paying their bills. That's not what we're talking about. But if there's a family member who has fallen on hard times or is in need, we should prioritize that. We should be generous in meeting needs of destitute family members. So that might be in financial terms of giving money, or it might be in financial terms of bringing them into your home and taking their financial care upon yourself, as in the case of an elderly parent. It might mean doing a project that needs to be done. But the principle is that the family is the first and fundamental care unit in God's creation. And so we all have a responsibility with our finances to care for our families, to provide for our families. So our family should be the first priority. Now that turns everything on its head, right? You thought I was going to say the church. The family. That means caring for your immediate family, your children, your parents, whatever life situation you're in. It also means extended family if they need it, grandparents. The second person or group that we should give to is the local church. The local church is the next priority. Those who labor in preaching and teaching are worthy of financial support. We see that in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 17 to 18. Let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. For the scripture says, "You shall not muzzle an ox when it treads out the grain, and the laborer deserves his wages." The church also, though, supports workers that are sent out to evangelize and plant new churches. In the same way, 1 Corinthians 9:14, the Lord commanded that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living from the gospel. And let me just be real straight. In our current culture, there's also overhead to cover the building and maintenance and bills that have to be paid for the church to function as we function. And that said, the church needs to be wise in how those finances are used. They should be spent on ministry and the advancement of the gospel, as well as care for those believers who don't have family to care for them. And so many churches get sucked into squandering money on competing with the culture to entertain or build their own kingdom. So monies given to the church must be wisely stewarded to reflect God's kingdom and God's priorities. This is one of the reasons why I'm not in favor of building bigger buildings. We should plant more churches. We don't need bigger buildings. We need more discipleship and relationship. We need to go out into the community and leaven in the community. This is why I'm a big fan of member ministry versus this big centralized ministry. And it's not to say those things don't have a place at times. What I am saying is that we need to be wise, and falling into the bigger is better mentality can be really, really, really wrong. The third persons who should give to is to the needy. Galatians 6:10. So then, as we have an opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially those who are of the household of faith. Now, there's a priority level here, right? First, believers. Second, unbelievers. God gives us priorities for how we meet the needs of needy people. And this is nothing less than putting our faith in action. This is not Galatians 6:10 at the bottom. This is 1 John chapter 3, verses 17 to 18. But if anyone has the words of God and sees his brother in need, yet chooses in his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us love in word. Let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. So the priority moves outward from your immediate family to your extended family, to the local church, including needy saints, to the outreach of the church through missions, including helping needy unbelievers. So notice how God is calling you to steward all your resources well. It's not just about giving to the church or giving a certain percentage to the church. It's about using all of the resources God has given you to reflect His values and His priorities and His mission. We miss the mark if we get sucked into thinking that giving is just about giving to the church. It's all of our money is God's money, and we need to have God's priorities and God's values, and it needs to reflect God's mission. So last question is this: what should I expect when I give? Number one, blessing. For you know that the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, though He was rich, yet for your sake He became poor, so that you by His poverty might become rich. Faith and obedience are at the heart of biblical giving. And at the heart of faith and obedience is the gospel. And the gospel is Jesus emptied Himself and became poor so that we might have all of the wealth in heaven in Him. He has dealt with us generously. And guess what? That results in Him being blessed, because He is given a people for Himself. He claims and redeems a people for Himself. The Father gives to the Son because of the Son giving for His people. And there is blessing to be found in giving God's way. God is calling us to live a life of worship with all of our resources. And when that happens, we receive the blessing that comes from it. It is more blessed to give than to receive. Now, here's the question. Is that a proverb or platitude that you recite and don't believe, or do you actually believe it? And if you say you actually believe it, my next question is, why? Why do you say you believe it? Is it because it's the right thing to say? Is it because the thing that you think you should say? I think it's the right answer. Or is it because you really believe it? And in really believing it, you can see in your life, in your stewardship of your resources, that it's a reality in how you spend your money, in how you spend your time, in how you use your talents. If you really believe that it is more blessed to give than to receive, we will be a giving people. And we will receive the blessing that comes from that. Number 2, the needs of others will be met. You will be an instrument of God's provision. A gospel-centered approach does not merely focus on meeting physical needs, as important as those things are. A gospel-centered approach meets physical needs with the aim of meeting their greatest need, namely their need to know Jesus. A gospel-centered approach does not merely meet the physical needs of believers in the body, it meets the physical needs of the believers as a means of pointing them back to the God that provided for those needs to be met. And God uses us to meet others' needs through generosity and giving. God's mission advances. Missionaries are sent, local ministry is done, you have an opportunity to reflect Christ, and that changes people's lives. God isn't hindered by holding our money and resources and time with a closed fist. He will accomplish his purpose. But when we have that kind of stingy, worldly attitude, we miss out on being part of the mission and what God is accomplishing, being part of his work. Number 3, God will be thanked and glorified. Giving the way that God lays out redirects all praises and glory and honor to him. We become instruments of his provision. We become ministers of his care. We take what we have been given and use it for him. And when that happens, we cease to become the focus. The aim in all of this is that his name would be praised and he would be thanked and as the sovereign provider. Now, my family has experienced this firsthand. We've been the recipient of timely gifts many times that were the exact amount to meet our need. In fact, we have received gifts, and then a day or two later, an unexpected expense came up. And that unexpected expense was for the exact amount of the gift that we received. It happened this last Christmas with the gift that the church gave to us. Now, when that happens, who gets the praise for that? I mean, I'm grateful and thankful for the generosity of God's people here at Arbor Drive in providing that gift, but I also recognize that we are not the ultimate providers of that is an extension of God's grace and God's generosity, and he orchestrated that to meet a need that we didn't even know we would have. And so all the praise and all the honor and all the glory goes to him. There were times in Missouri when we would walk out and there were out of church and there were groceries sitting beside our car. No idea who gave them, no idea why they gave them, but they were what we needed in that moment to meet that need. God gets the praise. God gets the glory. God is thanked. Fourthly, your faith will increase. We've talked about that, but as we steward our resources well, our faith is stretched. We are confronted with what or whom we're truly putting our trust in. And generosity takes the focus off of ourselves and forces us to act in faith. And I would argue that for us, we are very tempted to place our trust in money, in our resources, or in our time. And the Christian life hands all of that over to God and says, they are yours, do with them as you will. I am your servant. I will do what you call me to do. And I'm going to do it trusting that you will provide for my needs and that you will care for me. That takes faith. That is faith. So the last one is the gospel will go forth and people will be saved. We can expect that to happen as we are generous. Now, the truth is, it's going to happen whether we're generous or not. But we get to be a part of it. We're either senders or goers. And in the end, generosity, giving, stewardship is all about the kingdom. So we pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. But do we live that way? God has wisely chosen to use us as a means by which he accomplishes his purpose, and we grow from it. We get the joy of participating in it. We get the blessing of greater faith. We experience the freedom of worship in every area of life. And in that, we bless others by exposing them to the gospel and the joy of the gospel forth and people being saved. I experienced this with TLI. So like when I go on a mission or trip with TLI, I'm going to train pastors. And those pastors are going to go back to their congregations and point them back to Christ. They're going to go into their communities and call people to Christ. And I get the joy of being able to help equip them to be able to do that better. And that incorporates not only some financial sacrifice on our part and time sacrifice on our part. By our, I mean me and my family. But it also involves other people sacrificing, because there's generosity that allows those trips to happen from other people giving to fund those trips. And so I get the joy, and others get the joy of participating in God advancing the gospel through generosity. So I just want to leave us with this quote from Jim Elliott. Everybody knows this quote. A lot of people know this quote. If you don't know this quote, you don't know who Jim Elliott is, I suggest getting a biography on him and reading it. Jim Elliott's a guy that got killed by a bunch of people that he was going to minister the gospel to in a very remote part of South America. And he said this: "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep." Now just stop for a second. What does that include? Pretty much everything in this life. To gain that which he cannot lose. And I would also add, it's kind of dangerous adding on quotes of dead martyrs, but humbly, I would add, he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose, and be used by God so that others might also gain it. Let's pray.